Well, welcome to Conant Show 14. It's lovely to be here again, and I do have a guest coming. He has to shower up and get cleaned up after work, so Drew will be here in a little bit. We don't know how much of a little bit. And so I got to carry the show here for a little while. And so I was just playing a little bit of a ragtime kind of guitar that I came up with about 2 years ago. And just as I promptly got happy with playing that piece of music, I broke a finger. Yeah, all right, I feel a little bit of feedback. And there we go. So, yeah, I don't know if you can see it, but my main finger here has, yeah, this, it's not quite the same shape as the other fingers anymore. And playing guitar is the hardest thing for me to do at this point with that hand. And so it's a real struggle for me to play cleanly and precisely like I like to do. It doesn't impact my bass playing so much, but or piano for that matter. But when it comes to the guitar, it really is a struggle. So,
Can you heal it over time?
yeah, I understand that that these kind of breaks, you have to keep working the knuckle because it was a splitting maul. It came down on my finger. Yeah. So I had to really work on it for a long time to get it to bend again, and so I have limited range of movement, but it'll get better. Getting better is a good theme, I think, for tonight. Now that you mention it, because I forgot to honor my engineer. And so Conant Show always likes to honor our engineer, Paula Gloria Barton, for all the fine and wonderful work she does for us here.
Thank you, George.
And I also like to thank the facility, the Woodstock Acces TV station here. And I encourage all of our viewers to give feedback to the town, feedback to us. If you like our show or if you are getting a good signal or not.
Yeah, thanks to Time Warner for a good signal tonight.
Right. So we like to honor Time Warner. That is our access to you. And you have all access to us. We do have a phone number to call, I think.
679-7777.
All right, that's 679-7777.
Yeah, and I can get them on air.
And we can put you on air. And as a reminder, if you do come on air with us, you do have to turn the volume down or off on your TV. It will cause feedback. So the other night, I think it was Sunday night or Monday night, we did a show on the 104. And we had started talking about orgone energy and got into quite a bit of it. And that show, I had discussed a lot of the more technical sides of what an orgone device is, as far as a mechanical device goes. And I also touched on the idea that orgone energy, life force energy, prana, chi, ki, it's all the same thing, and had been not necessarily discovered by Dr. Wilhelm Reich, but quantified and qualified, because our ancients of many cultures, the ancients of many cultures had known of this energy and give us the words we use today, like from India, prana, or from the Orient, chi or ki, depending on how you pronounce it. And in the Native American philosophy, I think you could almost refer to it as the spirit that moves through all things. And but clinically speaking, Dr. Wilhelm Reich in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and a portion of the 50s had isolated this life force energy, and he called it orgone because he discovered its impact and properties doing clinical psychiatry and research, laboratory research on human sexuality, in the 1920s and in Germany. And this was a very bold undertaking on his part, because culturally speaking, the norms and mores of of the German cultures, as well as European and American culture, were very repressed. And he was a protege of Sigmund Freud, and the two of them had a terrible falling out and disagreement over a couple of items. And the one I'm more familiar is that the idea in psychoanalysis, a Freudian idea, is that many or most neuroses and behavioral problems are traceable to some form of sexual issue, malfunction or guilt complexes and this kind of thing. And Wilhelm Reich really took it more than a step forward. He took it all the way to the point of all deviant behavior, criminal behavior, neuroses, psychoses, all of it, the whole bag, is completely dependent upon our psychosexual, emotional health. And that if his contention is that a healthy person must include a healthy body relationship. So some people might call it, being in your body, being body conscious. But that being body conscious can be healthy or unhealthy. And it's a complete package. And I find parallels to that in some of the Native American philosophy that I've studied, which is a holistic approach to medicine. And part of our medicine is our ceremony. And in this idea, ceremony is any repeated act. Any repeated act is ceremony. So the sun gives us the ceremony of reliability, warmth, light, love, and all that the sun symbolizes, because it's reliable. It rises every morning and it gives us light through the day, and it sets at night, and then we have the moon and the stars to keep us company through the night, and that cycle goes on and on. And the intricacies of the life cycle on our planet, depends on the sun being reliable. If the sun didn't come up for 6 months, we would be in a frozen, dark world. So there's that ceremony, and the fact that we breathe is the breath of life. It's a repeated act. So just breathing is a ceremony. But then there's other kinds of ceremonies where you make a daily practice of greeting the sun, greeting the day as a human being. And I want to connect that to Wilhelm Reich's idea of life force energy being the substrate of reality. And that's one of my most favorite thoughts from Dr. Wilhelm Reich. And I've meditated on that thought a long time. What does he mean? That our sexual energy, our life energy, our healing energy is all indistinguishable. And it flows within us, through us, around us. And we share this energy with our planet and the sky. And that's one of the very, very fascinating things about this, is that when he successfully isolated orgone as a energy in a vacuum tube in his lab, it glowed sky blue. And in his later research of orgone energy related to the sky and rain and breaking droughts, he had a bit of an aha moment where he saw and related to the sky and that glow in that vacuum tube, and then he came to this idea that the sky was a living thing, and that it was full of orgone, and that different places on the Earth would, especially pristine areas, places that are very much natural, have a lot of orgone energy, and the sky will have a glow about it. And that's why he had his campus up there in Rangeley in Maine, is because of the richness of the orgone, the abundance of orgone energy in the area. And this was very helpful for the healing of many illnesses and injuries. So how that connects to the holistic approach of various healing practices is that this energy needs to move, and it moves through us. And in Chinese medicine or Asian medicine, different disciplines, they will often talk about blockages of energy, and that cellular memory, things that emotional scars will actually leave blockages in various tissues in your body. And in order for the tissue to get healthy again, that energetic blockage needs to be released. And then that cosmic flows can be reestablished, and those tissues can rebuild themselves. And
do you want me to put up a conference in 2012 about this by George Ritschel, just in the background, just to show how they were using it in Africa?
Sure, if you like.
Okay, just as you're talking, I'll go back and forth.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
So one of the things that I started researching in this interconnected world of ours is that, I want to talk a little bit, before I move into that direction, I want to mention a little bit more about Wilhelm Reich's experience as I read about it. Some of these were related in a book by his son Peter Reich, sort of a autobiographical and biography of his dad, and autobiographical of himself. And that was the challenge of doing this kind of research, which for industrial culture of the 1920s, again, very repressed, very unhappy. The working class people suffer, all of us do to this day, a form of, and I love this word, slave wagery, or wage slavery. And we're still suffering this control paradigm that demands that the human spirit, that what makes us human in our emotions and intellect, must conform to an artificial construction. And this, Dr. Wilhelm Reich railed against in his later years. But in his earlier work, the clinical research of putting dials and meters on couples making love and watching what happens led him to a very, very strange path indeed that ultimately got him involved with UFOs and weather modification and going up against the authority structures of the world. And all of this is part of us. This is life energy. And he found that this energy could be used to be converted to work energy, much like electricity is used to turn motors. Well, we drive most of our civilization right now by electricity and the internal combustion engine. How does this knowledge impact our world today? Not enough. That's what I think. We have social and cultural and religious and educational constraints that prohibit the average person or even a student in school from accessing some of the most brilliant research and minds, historical minds, there ever were. You know, we hear a little bit about Sir Isaac Newton, and we hear a little bit about Einstein. We really don't know much about these personages, but we know more about them than we do the man who gave us the alternating current that we all use today around the world, and the man who gave us the AC motor or an electric motor that drives many of the fans and any spinning object that's electrically driven is with an AC motor, electric motor, and that was Nikola Tesla. He gave us, through his inventions, wireless transmission of energy. But the Niagara Falls power generating station was designed and overseen, this construction of it overseen by Nikola Tesla, and it has worked flawlessly since its construction. I think it was completed around 1919 or something like that, very, you know, early 20th century. And we still have it going along just fine, producing really more electricity than the whole state of New York can use. And not many people know this. There are huge heat sinks near Rochester, between Rochester and Buffalo, just off the New York State Thruway, I-90. It looks like, you know, those old toasters, when you look inside those old, with those windings, you know, that get glow, you know. All right, imagine something the size of a football field up on its end, and the windings are on the outside instead of on the inside. It's kind of something like that. It's called a heat sink. And a huge percentage of the Niagara Falls energy that's produced at the generating plant there is released into the atmosphere as heat because there's not enough demand on the system. And yeah, so that's quite frustrating for those of us who don't really like the idea of Indian Point nuclear power, you know, with all of its inherent danger. Besides using Hudson River's water to cool the reactors, the warm waters or hot waters that are re-released back into the river are also irradiated. You know, they can't avoid that. That's just a fact of the matter. It's not talked about. But beyond that, it also changes the ecosystem of the Hudson River in its immediate surrounds. Because they dump very hot water. They let it cool a little bit, but not a whole lot. You know, they're dumping very hot water back into the river, and this is changing the river's environment, among other things. Yeah.
And we're told we don't have enough electricity.
Well, it gets better because, you know, my connection to the Native community, I'm very aware of a lot of the Canadian communities, especially the Cree. And the Eastern Cree have to deal with Hydro-Quebec. Now, Hydro-Quebec, this is completely wandered in my topic, but it's an interesting thing. Hydro-Quebec has dammed up many, many, many rivers. And if you know the topography of this part of Canada, it's reasonably flat. So it's not like you have canyons we have that you can fill with water, or like these mountains of the Catskills with the Ashokan Reservoir and the Papacton Reservoir that they were able to dam up some of the river valleys and have a natural basin to fill, they had to really modify the landscape of the North Country, just north of Montreal and other places in Quebec, to collect enough water to drive turbines, like the hydropower station at Niagara Falls. And so vast territories have been flooded. And there's always a price to pay for when you do a mass engineering thing like this, because what they found was by flooding all of this flat territory in Quebec, that there are deposits, natural deposits, of things like lead and mercury is now in the water. Toxic amounts of mercury getting into the fish, getting into the water supplies, and now we're seeing babies born with mercury, the effects of mercury poisoning, which is a neurological as well as a physiological. It's a genetically damaging.
Human babies?
Yes, fish, humans, the whole ecosystem, because this is vast amounts of water covering vast territories, because they don't have the natural valleys that say we do here in the Catskills. That's what made the Ashokan Reservoir such a successful experiment, really, to provide water to our major urban center, New York City. So these, ceremonies of life that are based on the sun's movement through our heavens, and the rains and the changing seasons, and we as a human being express all of those other elements. In our bones and in our flesh and our fingernails, we have the minerals and the stuff of the rocks, the stones, and the earth. And if you look at trees from not necessarily outer space, but say very, very high up, maybe 60,000 feet, something like that, it looks like hair on our mountains. So the earth and the human being is like a fractal mathematics. We are expressions of the greater whole. And that wholeness has to include the physical, measurable things, as well as the energetic, invisible, very difficult to measure things. And this is where Wilhelm Reich's research got him into trouble, is because he was beginning to put all of those different elements into a wholeness, into a whole understanding, where our physical, emotional, and intellectual needs all require attention. They all require care. You feed the physical body, and you also have to feed the emotional body and the intellectual body. And the quality of our activities and our the input, sensory input, will determine the quality of our experience, and consequently our expression, what comes off of us, what comes out of us. And he made a very big effort at healing families. This is when he was a devout communist. This is Wilhelm Reich in the 1920s in Germany. And he got thrown out of the Communist Party because he was making happy workers. He was making happy families. Husbands and wives enjoyed each other, and they enjoyed their union together, and husbands enjoyed their children, and they were less enthusiastic about being the good proletariat and more enthusiastic about being a good family man. And this was problematic for the powers that be, for the Communist Party, and subsequently the National Socialist Party, the Nazis. And why it was problematic is because people started having values that really centered upon the good parts of life, the important stuff, relationships with your parents and your kids and your mate. And that was very dangerous because the state wants all of that attention and energy. And we suffer that in our, we think we're free here in America or the United States. Well, how free are we when you have to work 2 and 3 jobs to pay a mortgage, a car loan, school taxes, the cost of living above and beyond that? And who takes care of your babies? Who takes care of your kids? We don't have, generally speaking, we don't have an extended family. We don't have grandma and aunties taking care of the kids when mom and dad are, off making money or, bringing in the crops or whatever it is that we have to do. So the state has, or the corporate culture will have daycare centers. And our children are being taken away from their mothers and their fathers at earlier and earlier stages of their development, and they become inculcated into the factory farm mindset, the mass culture, mass-produced culture. And herein is where illness and Wilhelm Reich's study of illness gets very interested and interrelated. I can remember since the 70s, everybody was talking about stress, how stress is unhealthy, and so many ailments can be attributed to stress. And it's all true. And what do we do to relieve that stress? Well, in the natural world, in the natural functionings of creature beings that don't have to participate with industrial society and machinery and technology, they have the stresses of making sure they secure their food for themselves and their offspring. And the rest of the time is, and I love watching these little tribe of birds out at my cabin, is being joyous. Once the dangers of life have been dealt with, making sure predators aren't around and making sure that we're all fed, the animals, the creature beings are joyous in their sunlight or in the rain, unless, of course, you can't help when natural disasters happen, and the animals have to deal with that too. But it is their loving nature that sees them through the stress and exigencies of life. And this is what Wilhelm Reich, I think, was touching upon, is that a happy couple, a happy family, can endure all kinds of stress because they have the love and the joy of each other's company to see them through. And that's a ceremony, going to bed at night with each other, saying goodnight, saying I love you, waking and seeing each other in the morning light, and greeting the day in whatever way that we do. That's part of that reliability. That's part of that ceremony. And another thing I want to make very clear is that there is a very big difference when I say doing ceremony or doing ritual. And the way it was explained to me is ceremony is always in gratitude. It's always a thankful thing. And we're never asking for anything. We're never asking for anything to do anything. We're simply grateful for everything that we have, good and bad. The challenges, we have to be grateful for them. The good stuff, the abundance, got to be grateful for that too. And the idea is that when we have this regular practice of being grateful, an attitude of gratitude, this elevates the quality of our life, and it elevates the quality of our thinking and our being. And this was very upsetting in the 1920s and 30s in Germany. People getting enlightened and loving their families and being loyal to the family first instead of the state. So he had to leave. And with leaving Germany and making his way eventually to the United States, he found that the United States was not any more receptive to these ideas. And he found himself very much alone as his research progressed, and he discovered more qualities of this orgone energy, this life force energy, and all the things it could do. He began to realize that it connects all of the disparate parts of our reality together. There's a unifying field of energy that we are all immersed in. And he also discovered that there were beings and energies that were parasitic. We call them UFOs. And he was using orgone accumulators to bring these alien craft down. And Roswell may have been one of his, the activity of one of his devices out in the desert may have caused the Roswell crash. There's some speculation about that. The Air Force took a very big interest in Wilhelm Reich and his weather machine, his orgone machine. And in the 1940s, conscripted Dr. Wilhelm Reich with Nikola Tesla and another fellow named Trevor Constable. And if you can ever get a hold of a book called The Cosmic Pulse of Life by Trevor Constable, I'll say that again, The Cosmic Pulse of Life by Trevor Constable. It's a hard to get. It's out of print, I believe, but it is highly educational as to the living nature of our sky. Well, these three men were conscripted by the Air Force to study the atmosphere because the Air Force's attitude is that if it's in the sky, we want to control it. This is a control paradigm thought. And, you know, they weren't really given a choice. And they were each assigned different aspects. One, for Dr. Wilhelm Reich, was to study the living quality of the sky. Two, Nikola Tesla was given the task of understanding the geomagnetic and electrical field phenomena associated with the atmosphere and the landmass in the oceans. And finally, Trevor Constable was given the latest photographic technology, infrared technology, to study the atmosphere and dissect the atmosphere with these infrared photography so that the Air Force could have a greater or better understanding of the composition of the atmosphere. And what these gentlemen encountered was nothing short of astounding. What Trevor Constable encountered is he discovered that the atmosphere is, imagine a gigantic bubble wrap. All right, you all know what bubble wrap is, right? It's, you know, some of us like to get neurotic and break those little bubbles and when we're nervous, right? All right. Well, or another way to look at this is if you have some suds water and you look where the bubbles come together, you will see that when you have, say, 5 or 6 bubbles, all of those planes of contact make a pattern, you know, of the bubbles contacting each other. It's kind of more like that. There are these bubbles that comprise the atmosphere, and they are another order of life. All right, so what are the orders of life? If we wanted to discuss that for a second, you have mammals, animal. Well, those are the kingdoms, okay? Animal, plant, mineral. Those are the three kingdoms. And then you would have mammals. Yeah, vegetable, animal, mineral. Yeah, those are the kingdoms. And then you have the orders of life, which would be, say, mammal, reptile, insect, fishes. Well, yeah, amphibians are in there, and there's those. So this next order of life is like air creatures. They're almost elemental creatures, as our Gaelic ancestors would call it, the elementals of the water or the elementals of the air. They recognized living creatures. Well, Trevor Constable was photographing these sky critters, is what he called them, and they were vast creatures with heat signatures like a body in the atmosphere. And this was a dovetailing with Wilhelm Reich's work with life force energy being in the sky. And this life force energy is communicated to the atmosphere or to the ground level by these sky critters, as Trevor Constable had called them. And like all good information and research, the Air Force and the powers that be set about on trying to understand how to control or defeat the sky critters, because they don't like the idea of smart living things being in the air. And this is really the horror of working for that kind of a program, is that you find out a discovery, my gosh, there's living intelligent creatures that make up the atmosphere, and we're in one. Wherever you are, if you're in the air that you're breathing is part of a conscious being that is another order of life. And that conscious being is filled with the same life energy that you are. And every traditional society around the world, be it African, Native American, Irish, Mongolian, they all understood. The ancient practitioners of natural medicine all understood this life, living elements of the sky and the water and the land and the plants. So, turning the conversation here, my monologue tonight, I sure do hope Drew makes it, because we're already punching through our hour. You got a thought there?
Yeah, I don't have the monitor up, but let me put it on this. This is from this conference, Organize Africa, where they took very poor farmers in drought conditions and helped them. So I was trying to put the pictures, and this one, I think you can see it up there. You described on the radio knocking a hole in this cloud thing.
Right.
It goes, typically these often dramatic changes happen in total silence and without wind, indicating that we are witnessing energetic processes and not conventional weather. You had experience with that, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that was the 2005, March 7th through the 9th. There was a rather large storm system coming up the coast, originating off the coast of Texas in the Gulf. And, traditionally you call that a nor'easter. And it was projected to dump as much as 6 feet of snow in some beleaguered places in the state of Maine, while coming up the coast and creating havoc along the way with rain and snow as it got into the colder air. So the storm shield if you folks don't know what a storm shield is, that is the cloud cover that precedes the storm itself. There's usually a large, I don't want to say wedge, but a large area of low clouds, cumulus clouds, that precede the actual, rotating storm that drives the wind and the rain and the snow into the landmass. Well, the storm shield had arrived, and this was very early on with the Orgone device that I had just built, really just hours before. And the one field phenomenon that I saw immediately was it was a clear, invisible beam. It was like a Hollywood special effects that drove right through the cloud deck, and there was a perfect circle through the clouds, 800, 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet. There were low-level clouds, preceding the storm, at most 3,000 feet. And you could see the blue sky. And around that blue hole, as the clouds were moving at about between 10 and 20 miles an hour, as they were moving from southwest to northeast, those clouds could not penetrate that specific beam of clear air. But the edge of the clouds were you could see them roiling, sort of ripping apart like fabric, just coming apart as it was moving along.
Like that picture?
I can't really see it very clearly from here, but yeah, probably. It's a little, but it was like it was surreal. I was actually said to myself, "Oh boy, I'm in trouble now. This stuff really works." And that was probably my first observable event. And then in the subsequent months and years that I've been continuing with my activity and research into the Orgone devices, it is very different than Wilhelm Reich's accumulators. And this is something that Wilhelm Reich, was very cautious about, because like electricity, Orgone energy has a polarity. And that polarity is the living side of it, and the other side is the deadly side of it. And the benefit of my research and tinkering with this stuff, I came to an understanding or a conclusion that deadly Orgone is in high abundance in any toxic material. So this really was a radical change in my thinking about toxicity and healing energy. Okay, you have lead, known to be toxic; mercury, known to all the heavy metals, all of them, cadmium. They all have toxicity. But then you have compounds, compounds like arsenic or curare, natural compounds, snake venoms. All of these toxic compounds have another quality of deadly Orgone in them. And then I started thinking about, well, then you have radiation. And, radioactive material like plutonium or cesium or iridium or something like that, they are radioactive means that they're actively throwing off subparticles, frequencies, radiation, radio waves, microwaves, all the same kind of things that, say, smart meters are throwing off. Microwave energy. Radar is microwave energy. So I made this connection between microwave energy and Orgone, and how in the spectrum of radio frequencies, I was just talking to Paula earlier today, the Navy had done lots of research on frequencies and the microwave and radioactivity as a health interest of submarine personnel or people on nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, you know. And what they discovered was in their research, and this research really kind of started in the 1940s, right to the present day, is that some of these frequencies and microwave energies are extremely toxic and harmful to living tissue. Life damaging. And other frequencies they found were more biologically friendly. And to connect that to Wilhelm Reich's work, he was discovering that the biological energy of life force energy or orgone energy is convertible to work. It can be harnessed and used like electricity. And he discovered that there were aircraft, whether they were human-made or non-human-made, we don't know, or he didn't know, that operate on harvesting the planet's natural orgone energy when they're in our atmosphere. And that's what he started to experiment with. So this is how profound a body of information that the man had to cope with having in his brain, which was this life force energy, was also something that connected him to alien spacecraft and healing of impossible illnesses and diseases. And my research has turned up a lot of verification of that. The difference is, though, that these devices that are being built by other people, many people, are much safer than the accumulators, because the accumulators could accumulate deadly orgone. And if they did, they could, just the smallest contact with the device could paralyze or even kill you. And one of his coworkers, one of his students, took an injury from an accumulator that had accumulated the wrong energy, the deadly orgone. Orgone generators that many people are building these days with a variety of materials, heavy non-magnetic metals and crystals and polymer resins and copper pipes and this kind of thing, don't have that problem. And I came to the conclusion that these devices actually take the deadly orgone and flip its polarity. So I started experimenting with the idea, well, okay, if we are loading up the atmosphere with this life force energy device that takes cosmic rays and even deadly orgone as a power source, and it simply converts these toxic frequencies into that which is living, a living frequency. So we're suffering. You know, the thought occurs to me, well, why is there still illness? Why is there still people suffering? And I think that we have to be complete and whole in all of these parts. Just flooding the atmosphere with life energy is great, that's good, but then there's intent. And where we're at, because the social constructions, the social, religious, educational, legal constructions that we all live in are very stressful. And how do we get around that? All the orgone energy in the world is not going to change certain truths, which is there are life cycles. We are born, we live our lives, we age, we ultimately die. It's my contention that our genetics and our DNA are programmed indefinitely. We don't have to die at 100 years. I think some of those old biblical stories of people living 900 years were true. Their environment was different. The technology was different. Perhaps the thinking.
Their legal system must have been different.
Or there may not have been one at all.
Yeah.
And so those of us who are suffering the legal system, those of us who are suffering illness, unhappiness, we really need to question what elements are not a good ceremony. You know, and one of the ways I did a lot of recovery work, I would describe it this way. If your ceremony is to drink lots of beer every day, that has a predictable outcome. You know, immediately you will get drunk eventually, but long term, your health effects will be impacted in your brain. You know, this kind of thing. And say if your ceremony includes heroin use, that has a particular path, a trajectory, and an outcome. Death or insanity or jail, you know, in any of these, you know, activities that are harmful. But those repeated acts, simple repeated acts, will ultimately accumulate in your body as a healthy or unhealthy outcome. And that's where our thinking is so critical. How we think, what we think, how we communicate to each other, what we feel, you know, and how we express what we're feeling is absolutely essential for one's inner well-being and the well-being of our relationships. Those are those invisible, hard to measure constructions. You know, your emotions have a geometry. You know, emotions that are in a good balance, you know, they have a shape, a harmony, a harmoniousness. So when two people or three people have an emotional construction between them that's harmonious, then you have a power there. You have an upliftment. And I think, you know, as a parting thought, I want to connect all of this to the idea of what medicine really is. And this is a thought that I got from my native friends, and that is there's good medicine and there's bad medicine. And how it is defined is good medicine is anything that brings joy, good health, and good feeling to the air, the water, the plants, the animals, and the people. All right? And bad medicine is anything that brings unhappiness, ill health to the air, the plants, the animals, and the humans. That's a far cry from taking a pill to feel better. You know, herbs and you know, herbal medicine or you know, allopathic medicine, you know, various compounds and constructions that are people take to deal with a symptom or an illness is a very, very limited source, you know, limited kind of medicine. When we look at the expanded thought of what medicine is, that includes our relationships, that includes what we say, that includes what we feel and how we treat ourselves and how we treat others. Not quite sure where I can go here, Paul, if you have
I was just showing at this conference in 2012 about what they did in Africa. They said the proof was that they got the shamanic endorsement. In other words, the old shamans of the area were impressed.
Yeah.
And these farmers had hardly any money, But the little money they had, they would scrape together to make these cloud busters. I think that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, my understanding was more than 2,200 units were built as of around 2010. That was what I had understood. That may not be entirely accurate, but
because I thought after your show, I'd like to play this conference.
Well, that'd be great. I think that's a great idea.
Then you can make a 2-hour DVD and turn it in on rotation.
That would be fine. That would be fine. Yeah. So my closing thought for tonight, I guess my pal Drew couldn't make it. That's kind of unfortunate because he's a real interesting fellow, and esoteric conversations like this are right up his alley. You know, Paula, you said earlier today on the way to the studio that you like the way, you know, I tend to end my shows with a positive thought.
Right. I love it.
And I think that's important that we do that. And my positive thought is that, you know, here in Woodstock, you know, my family, my partner, you know, we're suffering some pretty heavy stuff, you know. And besides, you know, an attack on our family, an attack on our reputations and income, we're also embroiled with the powers that be, the machine, as I call it, or the judicial system or the criminal system. And it is a machine. It is absolutely non-feeling. It is predatory on our community. And as a thought, I would like you all out there listening or seeing this show to think about how we can heal our justice system and how we can bring the tenets of truth to all of us. You know, there is no reason for crime if everybody, you know, participates in making a good deal instead of a crooked deal, you know, because that's part of the joy of being alive is, you know, if I make really great beans and you got collard greens, then we can make a nice trade, and there's joy in that. So there's no reason that our economic engine and our legal system can't be healthy. And that's my thought for today, is being truthful, honest, and healthy in all of dimensions of our community and our society.
It's a great thought.
Yeah. All right. So.
So, George, please come out.
It is you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
When his thought is correct and lasting.
Ladies and gentlemen, Damen und Herren, I'm very nervous because I'm not a regular speaker at conferences, so I hope it will not be boring.
But the seed of the fear of being misunderstood and maltreated by you. For you are the people, public opinion, and social conscience. Have you, little man?
Used to be a close associate and assistant to Sigmund Freud. He was a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, who actually, due to his very curious nature, took Freud's psychoanalytical theories a lot further, and in the course of his